Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King from 2003. When looking at Return of the King and its reputation, I've always liked this film, and I've liked all the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films, but I've always been a little hesitant when people act like this film is above the other films in the trilogy. It's the least accessible. You really have to have seen two previous really long movies to sit through this really long movie. It felt like its acclaim when it came out, and its continued reputation is based on the fact that Peter Jackson did it. He made the entire Lord of the Rings. They're all amazingly good movies, and he did a major feat in film history that no one thought he could do. That is amazing, and that's part of the reason I do love these Lord of the Rings movies, but I often wonder if this film kind of gets included in the achievement of the entire franchise rather than being able to kind of stand on its own merits. The way the previous two films, that never seems to be discussed as much in their reputations as much as it does with The Return of the King. It feels like this film kind of got more of a pass than the previous two that I thought should have, didn't get, that this film actually did, because it's like the culmination of making all these books into these amazingly epic big movies. Half about the battle at Minas Tirith with Sauron's army trying to take over yet another kingdom, and Aragorn, Gandalf, Legolas, and Gimli trying to stop him once again, and Aragorn trying to ask the army of the dead for help to hopefully defeat them, as the kingdom of Minas Tirith and its army is outmanned to the orc army that is coming to attack them, and he goes and finds the army of the dead. Meanwhile, Frodo, Gollum, and Samwise are trying to take the ring into the volcano and Mount Doom, as they are currently in Mordor and getting closer and closer as Frodo is getting more and more worn out and destroyed by the ring, and as Gollum is trying to come up with even more sinister ways to get the ring away from him as they try to complete the quest that they originally went to go on to try to destroy the ring and hopefully end the reign of Sauron as he is trying to destroy Middle-earth. I often hear the term wins all the awards, and I hear that thrown about a lot. There's only really one film that really won all the awards, and it's this one. This one won tons of critic awards. It won almost every Best Picture award for movies that were released in 2003. This film seems to have won. It's a ridiculous amount of awards that this film has won. And there was a kind of feeling in the air, and if you ever heard interviews with anyone who were in the committees for any of these awards, they would always say, well, he's achieved something that no one thought a live-action filmmaker could achieve. And there was this feeling in the air like, holy shit, they did it. And the reputation of these films caught up to them in this amazing kind of explosion of praise. I think people are a little skeptical of the other two because they're not as lighthearted as the books. It's a little different from the books. I think people were overly critical of it, but then as it went on, you grow with the characters, and the fact that it was mostly filmed all at the same time. This is actually the one film that had the most reshoots in it. I read an interview with Viggo Mortensen, and he admits that if Fellowship of the Ring hadn't done well and they had to release what they had left on video or something, it probably would have been a mess. Like, they absolutely needed reshoots. This is the one that had heavier reshoots than all the other ones, and you can almost tell in some places, particularly the fact that apparently they shot a lot of green screen in the parking lot of Weta Studios because they felt it had the best light, which is kind of like a very early silent film way to shoot a movie using natural sunlight. And you can almost tell it doesn't really match what else is going on, which is a little jarring. I think in some ways it takes me out of it. Peter Jackson had worked on this film for so long. He literally started work on this in the 90s, and it was 2003, and he was still working on it up to really the film's premiere, and even after, because he did some stuff for the extended edition after he'd even won his Oscar for Best Director. This was just a mammothly epic, ridiculous, big David Lean kind of project that I don't think anyone thought could be accomplished. And because of that, they won all those Oscars. They tied with Ben-Hur and Titanic for the most Oscars won in a single night, and they actually won every award they were nominated for, which is the biggest streak that's ever happened in Academy history. But it wasn't nominated for any acting awards. I always look at these films and think of how rich they are in character development and how they have such great acting in them. Two actors who got a lot of press at the time for not being nominated and should have been acknowledged a lot more than they were. One was Andy Serkis, who continues to be someone who everyone thinks should get a lot more attention for his motion capture performances and maybe get some Academy recognition. That's still going on 11 years later. His performance as Gollum is just, it's still incredible now, but it was incredible at the time because no one thought you could do that with motion capture and CGI. And Andy Serkis, I don't think we knew he was going to be the Lon Chaney of motion capture that he would eventually become, but it was clear he was an amazing actor, what he can do vocally and physically. Look at what happened with Caesar later in the Planet of the Apes movies, and when he did King Kong, he just really has a real good physical presence about him that I don't think a lot of actors could really do that as well as he can. The other actor who got a lot of acclaim at the time was Sean Astin as Samwise. I've always taken that side also, and I think the reason why this film, more so than the previous two, is because this is the one where he really has to overcome a lot, where he has to keep pushing Frodo, where he's the one who's making sure he gets to Mount Doom. He almost has a parental relationship with Frodo. He has so many great moments where you're just kind of shocked at how much Samwise has given up and how much he knows he has to do this, and this is part of his quest as well. Later in the film, where it looks pretty grim, and he gives this monologue about how if he had gotten the chance to marry someone, he would have married this girl who had ribbons in her hair. I kind of cried, to be honest with you. It's a really moving little monologue he gave, what he had given up to help Frodo. I almost look at it like kind of a parental relationship where he just realized this is what he had to do and he did it. You could look at this as a great adventure tale. That's certainly why it gets remembered and why it's so loved and why it made $1 billion. I think a lot of what made these films so amazing and made them such big cornerstones of film history and will probably be always put in the list of the best films of the aughts or the early 2000s or whatever you want to call them, is that Peter Jackson really understood that these characters had to matter and they needed to be like your friends, that it meant so much to the audience members. Samwise's character almost sneaks up on you. Like a parent, you kind of take him for granted. You don't really think about what he has to do. That was in all the films, but I think it's far more pronounced in this because they've been going through this for so long. This film really has the weight of going through a war, like they've been going through this journey for so long, and it just keeps going and it's just dragging them down. Samwise's character embodies that and shows that better than any of the other characters. Sean Astin was just so good, not just because that monologue, I had an emotional reaction to it, but I think because he's kind of like the conscience. This film in particular is about power and control and the idea that power has failed and that these characters have to come in and do what's right. And I don't think Sam really cares about that. He's a humble, honest guy, and he does what he has to do. The audience surrogate, but the surrogate of kind of the good and goodwill and the goodwill to keep going. I read a lot of reviews of when this film came out, and then I was curious to read the reviews of the first Lord of the Rings movie, and the reputation seems to have changed a lot. Why I was kind of critical of that is because it seemed like more people were critical at the beginning. I wasn't sure why that was, and I kind of didn't like it. And as I was watching it, and as you know, this film very much moves, it has 2 hours just like chugging along like a freight train, just bringing you in so much. I'm so invested in everything. Watching the previous 2 films like every year leading up to this one, I just got so into it, and it's amazing how fast this film goes by. I actually watched the extended edition, which is 4 hours and 10 minutes, and it didn't feel like 4 hours and 10 minutes. And as you get to a certain point, and as more plot developments happen, you have these amazing action sequences with the elephants and those barbed wire chains on their tusks. It just like keeps going and going and going, and you have the fight at Mordor, and you have this, and you have that, and you have all these things going on at once that are just colliding together, and it feels like it could fall apart at any time, but you're so into it, so carefully constructed. I think Peter Jackson, that's one of the things that like shows how great of a filmmaker he was. A lot of the other scenes in this film, it feels like he's moving the camera all around, keeping you engaged by keeping it exciting. At this point, it is really exciting. Like, you have these epic battles, you have all these things going on, but he keeps that level of direction going throughout it, that it almost like doesn't let go of you as an audience member. If you're already in, you're really in at this point. When you get through this film, it is really emotional. There is this feeling of, holy shit, he really did it. I've just witnessed this amazing motion picture trilogy, this trilogy that I've never seen a trilogy be this consistent ever before, especially at this grand scale. It did feel like you were witnessing something that David Lean would do, or Cecil B. DeMille. You didn't think Hollywood could do that kind of wonder anymore. That feeling that like, holy shit, Hollywood got this to work. The way this film just hits you emotionally, and the visual effects. This had double the visual effect shots as the last film, and the excitement to it and the drama of it is just amazing and incredible. And then when you get to the end, you're like, whoa, holy crap, he did it. Watching it this time, understand more why people come out of this one and suddenly go, oh my god, this is an amazing film, and also the whole trilogy, it's an amazing achievement. I still very much like this film, and I think this time it really hit me. It'd been a while since I watched the extended edition, so maybe that did have something to do with it. Maybe Fellowship is a little more accessible to just watch that and that's it. But with Return of the King, you really do have the weight of the whole adventure. You really felt like you've been through something with these characters. Part of me feels like it's kind of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. When you watch all the films, this is your dessert. And that's kind of how I've always felt about Return of the King, but I've never felt so richly and amazed about it. It's an amazing achievement. I think part of me when I was watching it and thinking about Peter Jackson and what's happened to him, those shots where the camera's just like zooming in from so far away or following people falling down a building as they've been shot by an arrow, it kind of preludes things that were to come that I wouldn't like about him. When I watch this film, he knows how to get it to work for the story. Like, he cares as much about the characters as the visual effects shots, but damn, those scenes when the elephants show up, that's just insane what's going on. It really reminds me of what he later do. I think there's a certain part in King Kong where it's just like action sequence after action sequence after action sequence, and in Return of the King, it feels like he's doing that, having this big excitement, huge epic battle, but then he's like, let's go back to Frodo and Sam. He seems to balance it out somehow, but I also think I excuse it more because these characters mean a lot more, and I don't think he's since been able to have characters as strong as they are. He feels like he's doing things that are both classical and new. It almost feels like David Lean and Spielberg, but a touch of its own originality to it, and has a really universal feel to it, which I think Return of the King and Lord of the Rings absolutely needs to have. You can really take this film, and after the feeling of it, you do be like, wow, I just sat through a lot of movie there with this entire trilogy. It's amazing he accomplished this and made it as good as it is and drew me in as much as it did and moved as fast as it did and had all these amazing effects. And it's just an awe-inspiring thing. That's why it became this big Oscar winner. It became this big defining classic of a movie. Even though I say Fellowship's my favorite, I almost feel like it's a little silly to say you have a favorite of this trilogy because it's kind of like they were all being worked on at the same time. It's not like the Star Wars trilogy where they made one, took a break, made another one. These were always in production. Even after he won the Oscar, they were still in production a little bit. The fact that they were all made and shot for the most part simultaneously. If I was going to make a list of like the best films of this decade, I would just say The Lord of the Rings. I wouldn't pick one probably, but I am reviewing them separately, and I still think they're all incredibly strong, amazing movies, and some of the best Hollywood big epics that have ever been made. Really, it was just so dramatic. It was like, oh my god, I can't believe he made these unfilmable books into incredible movies in a way that I don't think anyone could. There was a certain point where he really was this amazing, epic Hollywood director in the best sense, and I think these films really represent pride and glory and amazingness to epic movie making the way Cecil B. DeMille or David Lean did, and I think Peter Jackson could really work at that level in a way that most directors didn't have that kind of ambition and the epicness and the tunnel vision to kind of finish a film like this. But it was an epic, amazing film to watch, and it was an amazing thing to experience when it came out in the theaters. I'm so glad I was alive to see all these and see the extended editions and to do these series and relive them again. When you watch this film, you do think about the series as a whole, so it kind of makes sense. I guess I understand the reputation more because I'm looking back at it and I'm thinking just like, god damn, they really did it. It's really good. It's not the disaster that it could have been. It was an amazing epic of a movie, and I think The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King lived up to the thing that we always wanted it to be. That's why these films are in such a high regard, because you leave and you're just amazed at it, but you're emotionally connected to it, and you can cry and laugh and just be awe-inspired. And I think that's really what a big giant epic really should be, and I think this film as well as this trilogy lives up to that. So if you have seen The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And check out my other Tolkien reviews in my Tolkien review playlist. The next video will be The Hobbit and the Battle of the Five Armies, and that will conclude my Tolkien review series. I hope you have enjoyed them, and check out the other reviews of the previous two Lord of the Rings films, The Two Towers and The Fellowship of the Ring. And thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.